Before we kick off, I ask the panelists if anyone has anything else to add or any cautious. Yes, go ahead. From Myanmar. Okay.
I just want to add a few things after listening to my colleagues from our neighboring countries. When I hear about the media ownership in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, I'm sure Burma will go the same road, more or less in the near future. It's already started. I mean, the media ownership in Burma is very exclusive, and right now it's most of the big media, both print, television, it's owned by the cronies, and they are expanding very quickly. So in the future, I mean, our media would be probably less controlled by the government, but more controlled by a few companies, and of course that will be similar to Cambodia, for example. There will be lots of self-censorship, fear of losing their license for either print or the broadcast media. Having said that, that's also another important fact that I didn't mention in my speech. That is 2008 Constitution, which really, in fact, contradict to democratic society. Although we have seen all these reform process that has been taking place, although lots of things that has been encouraging for the changes, as long as this constitution is there, we have a very limited situation for the reform. One thing, it's because the constitution grant the leading role of the army in Burma politics. It gives a right to military commander-in-chief even to take state power in terms of if we feel that the country is kind of dividing into pieces, for example. And also it gives the army for 25% of the seats in the parliament automatically without competing in the election, both chamber of parliaments, and not just in the national parliament, but also in each state and divisions in the government. And the military commander-in-chief also has the authority to even appoint some of the cabinet members. And the government cannot interfere with the military budgets, military affairs. For example, even if Aung San Suu Kyi became president, which is not possible under the current constitution, she cannot interfere with the military budget. She cannot interfere with the military affair. And they are now, of course, talk about changing the constitution, which I think it's almost impossible, because you need 75% of the votes, more than 75% of the vote, while the military occupy 25%. So even if you occupy the whole majority, 75% by your own party, you need one military officer to vote to change the constitution. What the parliament now talking about changing the constitution, it's what we have seen is for their own benefit, which is changing from winner-take-all kind of election system to proportional system. Because the government already seeing that in 2015 election, they're not going to win the majority. NLD would take majority of the seats in the parliament. So if they don't change their electoral system, they will lose a lot more. They will lose a lot more seats in the parliament. So that's what they are trying to do. Just lastly, when I hear about all these ASEAN countries, it's next year, 2014 election, we should push Burma to put the freedom of press in the main agenda, and asking Malaysia, Cambodia, Laos to improve their press freedom.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else wants to? You want question, the two of you, please. Please prepare your questions for our speakers here.
Just to elaborate slightly on the blurring of the line between what constitute defamation and what may be critical of the Thai monarchy. As I said in my paper, and please refer to the paper that has been distributed both in Thai and English, I talk about the role of the Thai media in blurring the line of what constitutes defamation and vis-a-vis something that is critical. And as I mentioned earlier before the break, the judgment against Chhay, for example, was made without making a distinction between, say, a doctored picture of the king on YouTube, which is defamatory. You know, some people doctored the king, doctored a picture of His Majesty the King into half man, half ape, for example. I hope by saying this will not doesn't mean I defame the monarchy, but that's what exists on YouTube, which has been blocked here in Thailand, which means you can't really access it legally or easily here in Thailand. To that of documentary produced by public televisions like the ABC, and there is that blurring of the line. Everything has so far been, you know, for the past many years, been regarded as a no-go or a taboo. There is one former documentary writer whom I had interviewed, and part of the interview appeared on the Nation newspaper, which I worked for, which I like to cite. This woman worked for a major features magazine, a monthly magazine in Thai, and though I will not divulge the name of the magazine, there's not that many. You can, those Thais can try to guess it out. But anyway, her name is Virapa, so it's Angkun Tasana Niyarat, and she said this about the irony of the situation, open quotation. We saw the promotion of Bangkok as the world book capital this year, but how can we be a world book capital when people are banned from reading certain books? People have been jailed for producing books, and we call ourselves a world capital of books. This lady has been with this feature magazine for 7 years, and she told me, quite interestingly, that every December, which is the birth month of His Majesty the King, the magazine will have to try to elevate the level of praise, of flattery that would be heaped upon the king. And it got to the point that in one of the year, they decided that in order to make people feel more moved by the good deeds and action of the king, the magazine decided to combine all the trips His Majesty made to rural areas over the decades to visit his subject, and compare that to the length between Earth and the Moon. Okay, the distance between Earth and the Moon in terms of kilometers, and you combine it. And I guess she got fed up, you know, because I interviewed her not as a former feature writer. I interviewed her for the Nation as a leader of this so-called faceless group. These people recently donned paper mask of Somyot, okay, the guy whom I mentioned who got 10 years in imprisonment term at the Thai annual book fairs. And so she became a leader after 7 years of thinking about how to best better praise His Majesty the King. Thank you.
Who's going to start the discussion from the floor?
Okay. I'm Tiranai from Assoc newspaper. It's one of the sort of mainstream newspaper in Thailand, and I'd like to just comment a bit on Mr. Pravit's statements about difficulty in reporting about the monarchy in Thailand. Well, there's a saying that there's some good thing about speaking about the monarchy and all of this censorship in Thailand is that you can always find examples when you look around everywhere. Even in this room right now, there's an example of this kind of censorship being played out, which is me. Actually, to be very honest, I'm not even sure that I could report what Mr. Pravit had just said in a panel. Usually, my editors, they are very reluctant. They are quite afraid of what might happen if we, sort of report about this criticism or even mention about problem with the monarchy or whatever. But that's one thing interesting that I like to add, and some foreign correspondents here might find interesting, is that there's a belief in my newspaper, and I think it's the same with other newspapers as well, that if we don't praise the king and if we don't, have this format of reporting only the good thing about the monarchy, we will get in trouble because other newspapers are doing it. And so we have this kind of vicious cycle. In my newspaper, we say, we can't just stop praising or we can't stop this because if we stand out, we're going to get in trouble. And I'm sure other newspapers have the same feeling as well. So, and it's kind of get more and more elevated. Just like what Mr. Pravit has said about, every December there has to be this season of celebration, we have to praise the king, whatever. And they have this recent case about Matichon newspaper, which is my sister newspaper. Our publication, the sister publication. And they have this birthday poem celebrating the king. And Matichon got in trouble because the royalists think the poem is not great enough. This is reality. This is what happened. So what happened is that because we are so afraid of, standing out, we have praising and try to emulate our newspaper. Sometimes we have this kind of competition. Who can be more substance? Who can be more, grateful or loyal or whatever? And it's very, very unhealthy. And I'm not sure if other countries in Asia had this problem as well about this vicious cycle between newspaper. Each of them is afraid to stand out because they get in trouble. But let's not get boxed down by this problem with Thailand. We are international panelists here, for Christ's sake. And I'd like to ask Ms. Linda Christanty about this case about this atheist, this man who said on his Facebook in Indonesia that he doesn't believe in God. And I think he got in trouble because of blasphemy laws in Indonesia. And I'm atheist as well, and I'm quite concerned about this situation that apart from political censorship and apart from military intervention or whatever, I like to ask you, Ms. Linda and Ms. Gayathry, about the situation when how much of religious freedom, how much of freedom to speak out against religion is there in ASEAN? How many countries have blasphemy laws? That kind of thing. I'd like to know about this situation, if you can speak more about it. Thanks.
Thank you. About religious freedom. Yes, blasphemy law. The blasphemy law, I think, is a general question for all, but the specific case in Indonesia, this is online, on Facebook, that this person announced that he's atheist, and what kind of reaction does he get? You know of the case? Can you elaborate a little bit more?
While we wait for the Indonesian answer, I'll just dwell a little more on the less majestic law and the incessant praising or flattering of the king. It used to be, when I was young, I'm not that old, but when I was young, and I think those who are not that young could recall that the celebration used to be really kept strictly to a few days before and after, around December 5th. However, if you look at the situation today, For the foreign for the foreign participants, if you spend the evening and look at the tallest building here in Thailand, in Bangkok and in Thailand, the Bayok Tower, you would at night you will see this advertisement selling buffet, selling the hotel, selling the 3G wireless connection, alternating with messages praising His Majesty the King and the Queen. You see, long live the King again. It's every night. On Khao San Road, which is one of the most popular tourist destination here in Bangkok, if you mind to look at the front of the Chana Songkram police station, you will see a permanent neon display, neon lit display of the image of His Majesty the King. It's this sort of thing, we find magazines which for little or no reason would then put the portrait of His Majesty the King on the front almost on a monthly basis. So these kind of things is becoming very common.
So can you pass it on so that Linda can
Sure.
take a look, see the face and then the detail?
Go and read it out. I'll show it to her maybe. Maybe she's not aware.
A citizen, just a citizen.
Kun Pravit said about and also to your point about the sort of overemphasizing the love and the gratitude. It's also not just the monarchy, but also the government of the day. So, like in Malaysia, it is not the monarchy, but it's the government of the day that gets all these praises. And to a point where you think that they are so, the government-controlled newspapers are so compliant, so some people say sycophant already, to the point of their advertisements, and then they get slapped with suspensions because the government thinks they are too radical for them. Sometimes the stories are very small stories. The government feels that this is already too critical of the government, and then they get slapped suspension licenses or letters of show cause letters. And then the rest of us think, my God, this is so compliant according to any standards. These are really just pro-government newspapers. But the government thinks that it's not enough for them. So the more you give, the more they will want. To the point where they will take action against you, even though you think that you're already the best example of, hey, pro-government newspaper. So I think that there will come a point where it is never enough. It will never be enough. And the problem, I think, in all the countries is that the media is not united on fundamental principles. So instead of reversing it and say, we will all be united and not fall for this trap, it is, I know if I don't do it, you will do it, so I might as well do it. And then that vicious cycle just continues, right? So they are united for the wrong reason. They just don't want to be the odd one out. But if they reverse it and say, we are not going to compromise on this because it affects the integrity of our editorial stand, and say, we won't take that. So unite on that level. It may not guarantee anything, but it takes time to build that culture. So I think that it's not just an issue in Thailand. Of course, it's very clear here. You have a very strong institution. But it is replicated, as Naing also said, in Burma. You could have the dictator demanding for that kind of thing. So I think it's really a concept of the more you give, the more they'll want. There'll never be an end. On the blasphemy, there are initiatives of having, the blasphemy laws come in many forms. And the problem in this region is that there is a requirement of a religious identity in most countries, not all countries. So the issue of religious freedom and expression is a problem in many countries. Minority groups are not able to express and practice their religion. So in Indonesia, it is dominant religion against, for example, within the Islamic community, against the minorities, the Ahmadiyas, for example. You also see it in Malaysia. The minority Muslim communities also face a lot of threats. So it's not always inter-religion, it's also within the religion. And I think what we see happening in Burma these days are also being maybe exaggerated as the sort of religious conflicts, even though we know that is a very convenient description, but religion is a very strong tool for the governments to curb expression, because a lot of it is not about discussions of faith. A lot of it is the administration of religion, which involves power, money, structures, and things like that. So there are no clear blasphemy laws, but as I said earlier, a lot of it falls within the many other national security laws, religious freedoms, and things like that. But Indonesia is, in that case, the guy actually said, look, I'm an atheist. In Indonesia, of the Pancasila, one of it is the religious identity, also exists in Malaysia. Also in Thailand, it is a pillar, right? The Buddhism is a pillar. So it's like that. So if you're an atheist, you're actually not part of that narrative in society. So he got charged, and he was, I think worse than being charged, he was witch hunted. And witch hunt is on the rise on the social media spaces.
Let me follow up on this. How does the press in each of the speakers' country report either, let's say, religious conflict or ethnic conflict or human rights conflict issue? So how do you touch on this in each of the country? And there are, big conflicts that we now being seeing now. So please, you want to go first?
When talking about religion, it's complicated sometimes. Remember one movie in YouTube of American movie, in what happened in U.S. ambassadors. So in Syria. So Cambodian journalists are very careful with religious, reporting on religion. Cambodian majority, 90% are Buddhists. It means Buddhism is the state religion, and we have minority Muslim and so on. But Cambodian Buddhists respect all religion, all people who believe, because the constitution also provides a right to minorities. So far, Cambodia has no problem with this. But one movie producer produced like a movie series, a TV series on TV show. But one spot talking about a Muslim, like Muslim men are lazy, something like that. And then in the morning, a reaction from Muslim minority association, and then the movie stopped in the middle. So it lost money. So for Cambodia has no problem with religion, and we are very careful with this.
I think the Burma media, there is a kind of a clear, when it comes to the religious reporting, it becomes clear reporting between the local media and the exiled media in the recent violence with the Muslim. For example, like in the Arakan state, there was this clash between the Arakanis and the Rohingya population there. There were some media even came out with a statement publishing their own journal, clearly siding with the Arakanis. It became kind of the kind of standing on the populist sort of trend that going into that way. And for example, another journal also published a picture of a woman who was killed, and there was no information or anything like that, but the rumor was she was raped by the Rohingyas and brutally killed. And that picture came out on the Facebook within hours, and one of the journal published, and even there was no independent confirmation. So that kind of really spread the violence, and even like for the name of Rohingya, like all the exile media, we still call Rohingya as a Rohingya, but the local media has switched from Rohingya to Bengali. because the Arakanese don't accept the words Rohingya. So that's kind of getting clear. But in the recent violence in the Meitila, there were a lot more better in terms of reporting. I think the media were a lot more careful about what they report and try to get confirmation. But in terms of getting the both sides of the story, that's still pretty much lack. And that's also another problem. Even we have our own problem reporting about the Rohingya issue. For example, like when there was a violence clash happen, we sent our reporter to Arakan State from Rangoon, the local reporter, and we said, you have to make sure that you're also able to cross into the Rohingya side and talk to them and bring their side of the story. So he was there, and first, of course, he was talking to the Arakanese, and they were very helpful, cooperative. But the minute when he said that he wanted to go onto the Rohingya side, they changed. And then he went onto the Rohingya side by himself, and then he reported back to us. We aired on the TV, and their face looked totally different. The Arakanese, yeah. So he quickly came back to Rangoon. There was this kind of area. And there was another incident too, like in Mandalay, there were Buddhist monks staging the demonstration against the Rohingyas and using quite abusive words, asking the state to throw all these people out of the country. And our reporter were there, they were filming, talking to the monks, and we asked our reporter, please ask this question to the Buddhist monks, whether this is according to the Buddhism, Buddha teaching, peace and loving kindness and so on and so on. And they said, no, we can't do that. If we ask, we will be killed straight away. So that kind of situation now, I mean, with this new, of course, opening up in Burma, but also, I think it's a lot to do with, the country has been pretty much isolated. There was not very much knowledge about, what you call harmony and racism. I mean, you can see some of even the politicians talking about nationality issue, which is quite racist. But I don't think they even know that it was racist, yeah. Because we've been kind of blindfolded by the government that the nationalism is the most important, but it's become sort of extreme nationalism.
Can I ask one or two questions on this particular matter? Calling Bengali is furthering other them, right? To not Rohingya, but to othering the group into citizens of Bengal state. Is that right?
I think there's two reasons. One is they don't want Rohingya to be called Rohingya, because if you call Rohingya, then they will ask for the nationality or one as an ethnicity, and that's part of the reason. And the second reason is if you call Bengali, it's like you kind of come from Bangladesh, that you can be deported back.
The second one is, what do you see as to mediate or to sort of reconcile the conflict where it's really getting quite serious or already too serious?
I mean, since this violence happened, we have been talking to senior Buddhist monks who are quite powerful in the society, and they have been really coming up and talking on the television and the radio, to clamp down the situation, and not only to clamp down the situation, talking about this is totally against Buddhism. It's like, you're right, it's not, I mean, people label this as the clash between the Buddhist and Muslim. It wasn't like that. I think when we were talking to the people, the civilian in Meitila town where there was big violence against the Muslim happened, and about 40 people were killed. The local were saying themselves that I don't even want to say myself as a Burmese. I'm really shameful. I mean, they were the Buddhists here. I shame of myself when they see all this violence, and this is something I think organized quite obviously in a way, properly organized by some groups that are not very happy with the reform, or it could be like some kind of business interest that must be organized. And I mean, even in the past, you know, the successive military regime, they already created this kind of flame on the ground, but they never blow it up until they need it. And I think that's what happened. It happened in 1988 during the student uprising against the military regime dictatorship. In the middle of the whole big uprising happened, the clash between the Buddhist and Muslim, you know, happened. And that would kind of divert the attention from the whole happening. Yeah. So now they are kind of using the game for some benefit. I don't think it's a government involved. Maybe some sector in the government might involve, some maybe from the military, and some maybe from the government party.
Thank you. Linda has something.
There are actually in Indonesia there were no religion conflict in Indonesia. What people call religion conflicts were not like what media published it. The trigger of what they call religion conflicts were daily problems in the society. I went to North Halmahera, I went to Ambon, and I went to Borneo, and the people told me the trigger of the conflict is because one people try to take their land, try to take their property, and then because of that they have to fight with this another group who try to take their land or take their property. In North Halmahera, I went there. The people told me this is because the trigger of the conflict was because one community, one group from small island in North Maluku moved to the North Maluku, the big island, because the mountain is that island will explode, and then the local government decided to bring all the people from this small island to the different island, the big island, and then the people from this small island tried to get more land from the people in this island, and then they fight because of the property, because of the land. And after that, these people from the small group tried to make religion issue. They taught the indigenous people in this island, they are Christian, and the small group, they are Muslim. They said that, the Christian will try to have all of the land, and the Christians will be how to say in English? They try to have all of the land, and they will not to give us, and to make the Muslim group is smaller and smaller. But the trigger was not because of religion, but because of the land. And in Ambon, in Maluku, one part of Maluku, religions conflicts, the trigger of religions conflict was because one driver and one bad guy, they fight, and the bad guy asked the driver to give him the money, and the driver refused to do that, and then they fight because the bad guy talked to the people in his village. Christians will attack us. Christian will attack us. That is not because of the Christian will attack them, but because the bad guy need supporter for him. That was because of the money. And then in Borneo, Kalimantan, the trigger of the conflict that people call ethnic conflict was not because Dayak people don't like Maduris. It was because of some young men try to make a dirty joke or try to touch young women, Dayak young women, and the young men, they are Maduris young men and Maduris young men, and try to make a dirty joke and then touch the Dayak's young girl, and then the Dayak's young girl didn't accept it, and then they talked to the leader. Oh, young man try to do something to us, touch our body and blah blah blah, and the leader asked all of the young men and asked them what happened to them, why did they do that, blah 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 blah. And then one of the young men, maybe they were drunk or something like that, and stabbed the leader's son, and then to make one people and talk to anybody. Oh, Maduris attack Dayak, blah blah blah. Dayak attack Maduris, and then okay, ethnic came up. That was not there. There were no conflict, religion conflict or ethnic conflict. The trigger of the conflict are problems in the society, drainage issue, property issue, maybe someone steal your mango fruit, yes, and then because one of them try to get more supporter, they try to say something, and then war happened. That's all.
So yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we go accordingly. We take we take questions first, and then we get everyone to reply. All right, Sid, please go ahead.
My name is Ampon Buntan from Hoi Sai Community Radio. It's very interesting, but I'm going to bring to the local, so I'm gonna argue in Thai instead. น่าสนใจนะคะที่เพื่อนจากซีป้าพูดถึงเรื่องที่ว่าสื่อยังไม่พร้อมที่จะรับรัฐบาลใหม่ในมาเลเซียซึ่งอันนี้ต้องว่าน่าสนใจสำหรับเรื่องการเมืองแต่ว่าจากการอ่านหนังสืออ่านเอกสารเนี่ยจะเห็นว่าจริงๆตอนนี้เราก็มีสื่อที่หลากหลายมากใช่ไหมคะมีสื่อที่มีอำนาจแล้วก็สื่อก็มีผลประโยชน์และปฏิเสธไม่ได้ว่าสื่อรับผลประโยชน์ด้วยแล้วก็เป็นคำถามจากการอ่านเอกสารแล้วก็ดูจากสถานการณ์เนี่ยว่ามีสื่อมากน้อยเท่าไหร่ที่ยังรักษาผลประโยชน์ของประชาชนเราพูดถึงเรื่องเสรีภาพของสื่อซึ่งก็เชื่อว่าเป็นเสรีภาพถ้ามีสื่อมีเสรีภาพประชาชนก็จะมีเสรีภาพด้วยแต่สิ่งหนึ่งที่เราเป็นคำถามก็คือว่าเราพยายามจะทำให้สื่อจะทำหน้าที่ที่จะให้เราเท่าทันสถาบันต่างๆทั้งสถาบันสูงแล้วก็สถาบันศาสนาสถาบันต่างๆในสังคมแต่อันหนึ่งที่เป็นคำถามก็คือว่าเราถ้าสื่อเป็นสถาบันหนึ่งเราจำเป็นด้วยที่จะต้องทำให้ประชาชนเท่าทันสื่อด้วยหรือเปล่าแล้วในความเห็นของวิทยากรเนี่ยบทบาทของสื่อตรงนี้จะทำให้ประชาชนเท่าทันสื่อได้ยังไงคะ
Next question please. I think someone at the back, and then here. Kun Montira, first, yes.
Thank you. Congratulations to the floor. and thank you very much for raising an important issues. And actually, I would like to echo the comment from Hue Sai Community Radio colleagues. Actually, my question is very related to the role of the media as a fundamental institution in the society. I would like to know how the media think of revolving itself, playing the role of the media as a change makers in ways that in ways of knowledge building on the freedom of the press, which is an equivalent to the to the freedom of expression. How would you make yourself being a role model or the change maker in that sense? And I would like to see your insight, especially in the media in Asia Pacific, and how you see yourself to bridging that understanding among the people, because the people's interest and the people's benefit of knowing a non-biased information and non-challenged information, or not being influenced by any interest. How do you see yourself changing your own role? Second, how do you see yourself in playing a role in reconciling conflicts? You know the conflicts really well. How do you change? How do you evolve yourself as a change maker in reconciling the conflicts, protecting the best benefits of the people? Shall it be religious conflicts, conflicts of business interests, territorial disputes, ethically challenged policies and decisions making of the government? Thank you.
Two hands here. Kun Wan Noi, it's your turn. Yeah, here. And then we come back to the front.
Hi.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Sulak from Prasha Thai. I have two questions for the panel. The first one, I wanted to know, because this is specifically for Kun Chhay Sophal, because in Cambodia last year the government tried to pass the Cybercrime Act, from what I understand. So I wanted to know, like, what's the developments of that law now? And for other countries, is there the same attempts to curb online freedom? Like, is there any attempt to pass the law to curb an online media freedom? And the second one is for Gayathry. I wanted to hear your opinion about to what extent can the media in Malaysia play the role in encouraging free and fair election in the upcoming election next month? Yeah, thank you.
Right.
ขอบคุณค่ะก็ขออนุญาตถามภาษาไทยเพื่อเพื่อนๆที่มาจากภาคใต้จะได้เข้าใจด้วยคืออยากจะชวนลินดานะคะแบบแล้วก็อาจจะพานักลิสต์ท่านอื่นเนี่ยคุยกันนิดหน่อยเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของบทบาทของสื่อในสถานการณ์ที่มีการทำกระบวนการสันติภาพเข้าใจว่าอย่างในอินโดนีเซียเนี่ยก็อาจจะน่าสนใจเพราะว่าตอนนี้เนี่ยประเทศไทยก็เราเริ่มจะเห็นกระบวนการสันติภาพที่เกิดขึ้นเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของภาคใต้อย่างที่คุณประวิตรก็พูดไว้ในเปเปอร์ที่เขียนไปเนี่ยบอกว่าสื่อไทยโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งสื่อกระแสหลักเนี่ยยังติดอยู่กับวิธีการบางอย่างเช่นยังเรียกคนที่กระทำการในภาคใต้ว่าโจรใต้อยู่อะไรอย่างเงี้ยนะคะก็อยากจะชวนคุยนิดนึงว่าภายใต้เงื่อนไขในแง่ที่มีการเริ่มกระบวนการสันติภาพเนี่ยบทบาทของสื่ออย่างในอินโดนีเซียเนี่ยเขามีมากน้อยแค่ไหนแล้วก็เขามีส่วนช่วยในเรื่องของการสนับสนุนให้ประชาชนเนี่ยมีส่วนร่วมในเรื่องของพวกนี้ยังไงหรือว่ามีเงื่อนไขอะไรที่ทำให้สื่อมีบทบาทในทางบวกหรือในทางสร้างสรรค์ได้อะค่ะ
The gentleman in the front.
Hello. Hi, my name is Ramu. I am with the Burma Fund. I have a question on the issue of transitional justice and media ethics in Burma. My friend Mr. Ijana made very good points, the interesting point that no journalist or media can address the issue of human rights violation and also human rights violation and corruption of the former military junta and also I think the current government. So how can, this is very important issue. That is also something to do with the role of media in the society. So how and what can the international media organization do about this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just take this many questions. One more. Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn. Just one. It's not going to be a question. My name is So Ong from Forum for Democracy in Burma and Exile. My observation of the panelists in the panel. First of all, thank you very much for your presentations. When people are desperate, like you have your own problems in your own country. For example, Thailand, you have this less majesty and a lot of repressions against your own media, rights, and others as well. Malaysia, for example. So when people are desperate, like they are going to get out of the focus, what's happening in the other countries. For example, in Burma, I've seen many of my friends, journalists, some, not many, they are very upbeat about the reforms, changes happening in the country. And I'm very much concerned that you are going to be out of focus, because we are not there yet, we are not what we want the people, they want to have, for example, especially the press freedom in the country. Now Burma has a 151, the freedom index. It may fall down soon because of, especially with this new law that they haven't adopted yet. And relating to that, we have a news that the EU is going to suspend or lift all the sanctions except the arms embargo. And they are very upbeat, maybe they are blindly upbeat about what is happening. And maybe even people propose to President Thein Sein a Nobel Peace Prize. How come? Have they forgotten what this military government did to the people in '88, in '96, even during 2007? So please do not forget what has happened, and what is going to happen with this government. You don't know who is going to win in 2015 elections. You just don't know. Just wanted to make a reminder. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Soong. We have half a dozen of questions here for us to respond. So I will go country by country: Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, and back on this side. So let each of our panelists take on any of the questions that were asked and choose to make your reply. All right? You don't have to answer every one of them.
Thanks. 10 questions, something like that. Maybe 5 people, but somebody has 2 questions. But I try my best, because many panelists, role of media to, solve conflict, to reconcile conflict, minimize dispute, something like that, similar. Actually, the role of media, we have 3. As a journalist, we have 3 roles. The first, informative. We have to report both negative and positive. If positive, the government and other institutions related must try to copy or encourage to do more. If negative, they try to eliminate. And the second one, our role is, to provide education to the public. Environment, education, health issue, everything that we provide education. At the same time, we also provide entertainment, like TV, radio, TV try produce concert, talk show, radio call, request song, newspaper try to write article on star, on sports. So we provide entertainment to our. Some professionals say that journalists never care about conflict resolution. The conflict resolution is the task of the government, the task of the leader. Journalists has the role to report what you have done so far. We are human beings. We also try to help to join the governments and other states or government leaders to minimize conflict For example, like specific talking about Cambodia and Thailand has dispute between Pravit Temple and the area around. As Thai colleague interviewed me earlier, that how can we solve the problem? This is not a journalist's role. This is politician. This is the government, some politician of both sides. But the role of media try to report what is going on. Now, the issue, where the issue right now, and what happened next. Who report, who respond to media when media ask question. We are journalists, but we also love our nation. Cambodian journalists try to report maybe some, gain a benefit to Cambodian people. Also Thai journalists maybe do the same. But we, as I said, we provide education. We try to avoid conflict. We try to avoid national discrimination, because we are living like Thai and Cambodian. We have the same common culture. We have the same Songkran last few days ago. So why we dispute together? Why we don't try to find a solution? The government is responsible for minimize, for national reconciliation, and media do after.
Okay, I think I forgot all of questions, but I will focus on what I remember. I think about can media support peace process, right? And I don't know, I still believe that mainstream media has bigger capacity than smaller media to support peace process. Alternative media, for example, Aceh Features in Aceh, I found it with some friends 8 years ago, has limited impact to do that. For example, people in Aceh, they read Serambi Indonesia. Serambi Indonesia is the biggest local newspaper in Aceh. And around 3 years ago, after peace, 3 years ago, after 3 years after peace accord, after Helsinki pledge, the military said in Serambi Indonesia that ex-combatant, ex-guerrillas of Free Aceh movement killed one of military officer, and Indonesian mainstream media, the Indonesian national media in Jakarta, published it, and I think it makes the war will come. I and some friend in Aceh, we worried about it at that time, and we could nothing, because we are very, very small media. And then the military arrested some people, and they kill and they kidnap one guerrillas, and then after 6 months, suddenly Department of Defense, Department of Indonesian Defense, Department of Defense in Jakarta, said the killer of the military officer is not ex-combatant after 6 months. And they said that it is not a political case. And they said that it is about drug war. But they didn't say, and they didn't publish this statement in the paper. And then that's all. Yes, chaos. And then people still remember, and maybe military officer and Indonesian government still, Indonesian government recorded this case as political case, because the Department of Defense, they didn't publish their information about this in the paper. And how media can support the peace process. Small media, for example, Aceh Features, most of our readers, they are students and lecture in the university, and maybe we still have a small hope to make them can talk to the government, to the decision maker about the truth, but the impact to the public, to the people, I think mainstream media, they have the bigger power and the bigger capacity and the bigger role to do that more than smaller media. I'm not pessimistic, but we have to try to find a way or solution how to make the truths can read by the people, more reader. That's all. Thank you.
Well, I'll go quickly because I haven't even get the chance to answer about the religions and ethnic. So let me start with that very briefly first. On religion, I don't think the Thai media has started a genuine challenge or questionings of the basic tenets of Buddhism yet. Unlike in the West, they went through reformations and all that. So the Thai media is still just dwelling on, say, misbehaved monks were caught arrested for drinking or sex behavior, but nothing about the main tenets. And I think that will be a challenge for Thai society and not just the Thai media. On the South, when you talk about the ethnicities and all that, as one of the participant has raised, I raised the issues such as the 2 point on the 3 southernmost provinces of Thailand, which is basically, I call it Pattani, which is one of the main province. Pattani until 100 years ago used to be semi-independent at least, and the populations there are predominantly Malay. So today, when the Thai language media in particular refer to them, they often omitted the term Malay, and the people there are only referred to as Thai Muslims, okay, or Kon Thai Muslim, which is, I think, a very big omission that deprive the local people of their Malay identity. They speak a variant of Malay. They still practice Islam. So that's one big problem. On top of that, as someone has just mentioned, I mentioned in my paper that the term Southern goons in Thai, or Jon Thai, often used by the Thai mainstream mass media in reference to the separatists in the 3 southernmost provinces, doesn't help the public understand the depth of the conflict, which is based on history, ethnicities, and partly religion as well. Okay, now to answer some of the questions raised on media literacy orความเท่าทันสื่อ, I believe it is a very important issue that the Thai public, or any society for that matter, will need to better understand the strengths and weaknesses, the positive as well as the negative roles of the mainstream mass media, as well as perhaps alternative media as well. And these I would really strongly recommend, and I don't see much role of the Thai educational system, and Ajahn Ubonrat formerly with teaching mass communication at Chulalongkorn University. I really expect and really hope that the educational institutions will play a greater role in literating Thai society to become more informed, okay, and more critical of the role of the Thai media. NGOs can do their work. Alternative media such as Prasha Thai and others can also play a role, but as well as concerned journalists. I think concerned journalists to become a role model, just to follow up with the other following question by someone else, I think may have to choose to pay the price, sacrificing part of their promising career And I look at some young lad from Kaosor who is quite young. I think the time will come when if he will stick on becoming, continuing to be a journalist, time will come when he will have to choose between maintaining his vocal voice in public or just becoming another journalist in the conveyor belt of the media career path. There's a price to be paid. And I strongly urge committed journalists, young or old, to be tenacious and unwavering in standing up and speak the truth to society. Two more. On the curve on online freedom of expression, of course, Thailand has the Computer Crimes Act, but on top of that, I think we see a lot of role being exerted by what we call online witch hunting by conservative groups, be it ultra-royalists or, just recently, I should tell my Cambodian counterpart, for the past few days I have been accused of being a Thai with a Cambodian heart. Simply because, I tweeted on Twitter saying that let us fight, this disputed area case, which is now ongoing at the World Court, today is the last day, in a fair and honest manner. And if we lose, if Thailand loses, let us embrace it with integrity and not make a qualm. Because there are some Thais now who say, we're going to wait. If we win, that's fine. If the World Court gave us the land, that's fine. But if the World Court doesn't, then we're going to do something. And I said, this kind of attitude is totally disgraceful and unacceptable. And for that, they accuse me of becoming Cambodian. So that's...
Okay. Let me turn to Naing and Gayathry.
Where should I start?
Anywhere you like.
Start with the online issue. In Burma now, online media is still kind of free because there's no legal basis in the Burmese law, except of course it's Electronic Acts and so on. But MOI hasn't really counted the organization. But in the new law, they're also adding their online media to register with the government. But what's happening now is, I think more or less the online media is now sort of controlled by some of the military propaganda wings. That they have been doing it for the last few years. Nowadays we call Facebook as in Burmese Pwabuk. It's like generating the rumors, spreading like conflicts. So in this like religions violence, there were lots of hate messages written on their Facebook pages, and lots of like unknown pictures were published, creating lots of confusings and sometimes even create more angers. And they also have their own blogs pretending to be activists or Democrats, but spreading more confusing into that. They're not like as good as Chinese, but I think the government has been really using it. And now, of course, even the ministers and the president office, for them, use Facebook's online to distribute their own statements, information, and so on. So it's been kind of getting widely used. But compared to our neighboring countries, Burma was the least use of internet. I think it's only 5% of the population had access to online out of 55 million, 60 million population. So Burma is still very far behind. In terms of the question about the role of the media, it's I kind of agree also with our Cambodia friends. It's kind of tricky situation. How much are we going to advocate, have some kind of agenda? Because we ourselves, in fact, we came out as an opposition radio station. We belong to the exile government. They have started our station, and our station not only belong to the exile government, but also all the exile opposition movement. So we had all the story, all the news about the exile activities, and of course all the stories that are negative to the government and the military regime. And we used to say, tell me like if I can report any good things about what you're doing. So it's kind of easier to excuse ourselves. But after a while, we start thinking, if we need to be also critical to the exile and opposition, and otherwise, people will not believe us any longer. And also, we started thinking about when we were under the military regime, we hated their propaganda. They use one-sided story, and now we have a microphone. We have a way to broadcast back to the people. And are we doing the same thing as the government used to do? And that will, then we won't be this. We will probably be the same as them. So we started shifting, becoming more independent from the opposition, and that's a very difficult choice. And also not very easy because the opposition don't like us either. So we were shifting from the purely like the propaganda opposition radio to become more like an independent radio. But we still, of course, report about the opposition movement in a different way. And people first accused us opposition, and then we became an NLD radio because we've been reporting a lot about the National League for Democracy, their party member being arrested and so on. But nowadays we are being accused as closing to the government. But that because in the past the government refused to answer any of our questions. We always asked them comments, interview, verification, and now they started talking to us. So we got the both sides of the story, but we need to make sure all the facts are right. So I think we need to be like when it comes to issue. Of course, we have our aims to like this conflict in the religious clash. For example, we want to have a peaceful solution, but when it comes to news reporting, we try to be balanced, and of course trying to make sure all the facts are right. But out of the news package program, then we're trying to bring different religious leaders to speak about their religious meaning and definition, and that's the way we're trying to do with the conflict. Just the last one about the Burmese question about transitional justice. I think that's a very tricky situation. A few years back, the special reporter for human rights on Burma, he called for international community to look into the Burmese military human rights violation, whether or not they have committed crimes against humanity. That's a very, very strong recommendation by the special reporter. And if the government, the military committed crime against humanity, then they should be brought to the Hague. And that's really, in fact, scared the military regime. And there has been a big campaign internationally to ask different governments to implement this recommendation by the special reporter. But lots of countries hasn't really came out and supported it. Even there's lots of some Western countries didn't really support that recommendation. And then when Aung San Suu Kyi was released and she was asked, whether she support this recommendation, she kind of didn't really answer. And there are, of course, different thinking behind, and the same with the press, because lots of people think this is a process, and it's not really get to our wishes, and it's still kind of not even the halfway yet. And if you sort of touch the military now, they might come back and might break the whole process. And that fear, I think, it's a lots of people mind, even including opposition leaders, activists, and also among a lot of journalists. Mind that if we don't push them too much, that the military might come back to the power. So it's a kind of a difficult, tricky question, but without looking into transitional justice, I think it would be very, very hard to have complete or even the half complete reconciliation, especially with the ethnic groups. There would gross human rights violations that happen in the ethnic areas, like in Shan State, for example, in the eastern part of Burma, close to the Thai border. Over 800 women were raped during the last 10 years by the Burma army. And in Kachin State, there was still human rights violation happening there, as of course not as big as before, but still happening, and the war is still going on in that area. In the Korean State, it's the same. So now the government's talking about negotiation, reconciliation, but that need to be followed up by some kind of justice in the future.
Many real problems still to be solved. So I'll give Gayathry 1 minute.
Okay, so I will answer very quickly about the cybercrime law. In Cambodia, as I understand, it's kind of shelved for now, but it might emerge after the elections. I think that it's on the table. They will be actually passing the law, but I think it will be after the elections in July. In other countries, the Philippines just passed the Cybercrime Prevention Act, which notoriously included a provision on libel and defamation. So it was included at the last minute, and so beyond just protection for cybercrimes, it actually is also a bit like CCA lah, the Computer Crimes Act in Thailand. So it was added last minute, and it was senators who were very upset with online media criticizing them and decided to sneak this into the law. So that's not very good. Definitely in Indonesia, it's in the works to have laws governing the internet providers, content regulation. So once you touch content, then you are looking at expression limitations. Singapore, I don't think there's a very specific one yet. But it's also on the table in Burma, as Ko Naing said. So that's where the direction is. So many of them feel that they are quite late in terms of introducing it, but it actually goes beyond just the cybercrime. They are including a lot of content regulation in there. On the other issue about Malaysia and how to prepare for the elections, I'm pessimistic about the mainstream media because it's deeply entrenched in terms of self-censorship, in terms of an apathy among journalists. And I will speak only on behalf of Malaysian journalists. I respect all my colleagues here, so please don't take it personal when I say that. I think beyond the issue of structure, beyond the issue of laws, beyond the issue of breaking the monopoly of the media industry, I think we have a lot of lazy journalists around. And lazy I just need to explain that they are not doing enough to understand the issues. And that's why they are also causing harm through their stories than minimizing harms. I agree with my colleague saying that the journalists do not solve problems of society. You highlight them, you expose the problems, but they don't do that. The worst is they're causing harm because they don't understand issues. They don't do enough to understand a lot of these issues. So I see what is happening in Burma, the capacity to address the conflicts, the issues. But you go to Malaysia and you ask them, they actually do not know how to cover elections. The intricacies of the elections. The basic issues is fine. Who's contesting against who, how many voters in the area, how many women, how many demographics of Chinese, Indian, blah, blah, yeah, that's all okay. But this is the first time in the history of our elections, people are discussing a caretaker government. For the first time. It is there, but the media does not know how to explain the role of a caretaker government, the nature of a caretaker government. They still do not know that the cabinet at the moment has already been, it doesn't exist. It's only a caretaker government. Yet they still call prime minister, they still call minister because they do not understand. So I think with Malaysia, I think there is a need to break that institutional I don't know. That foundation is wrong already, and that foundation needs to be broken, which involves anti-monopoly laws, which involves actually removing the licensing provisions, which to create more level playing field for more media to operate. But at the same time, the journalists all need to go through this process of de-education and re-education in Malaysia. Seriously, there are too few journalists who do a good job in the country, and they've all left the industry into something else. So
including yourself,
including myself. So I can sit here and complain about them. But issues of human rights, issues of governance, monitoring state, they don't do that. So I think that there's a lot of education attitude change that needs to happen, which is much more difficult than saying remove this law or not, because I think that they have become too comfortable. Because Malaysia and Singapore are among the highest paid in the region for the media, so there's really no incentive to change at the moment. So I'm pessimistic about the journalists. I'm optimistic about the overall political process from the sort of citizens.
Thank you. Let me keep you hungry for 2 more couple of minutes, because Linda wants to say something. She writes her note first and then she speaks. So
I remember one question about how the journalists become the change maker. Yes? Yes. If they work for media industry, it's depend on their media industry policy or the owner of this media. And for example, Kompas Daily, the biggest newspaper in Jakarta, has their own journalism rule, and they call it crab journalism. Crab, you know crab? Yes. And and what is that? Crab journalism is step back and go into the hole if the enemy come or if the enemy are strong, and then come back little by little. If they don't see us, and then maybe we can do something, maybe. And because of that, Kompas Daily, the biggest newspaper in Indonesia, they are not critical media. They play in the comfort zone. Yes, and for us who work for alternative media, we have to build good networking to make us stronger and bigger and become a change maker for our society. We have to build, because we are small, and then small, each go together, maybe become stronger. Okay, thank you.
Let me just ask our participants from the south.
จริงๆแล้วการทำงานสื่อในพื้นที่3จังหวัดเนี่ยเรามีพรบความมั่นคง2ฉบับฉบับแรกเป็นพรบความมั่นคงของรัฐไทยและอีกฉบับหนึ่งเป็นพรบความมั่นคงของฝ่ายขบวนการสื่อซึ่งอยู่ในพื้นที่นี่ลำบากคือเกิดความระแวงทั้งสองฝ่ายรัฐก็ระแวงต่อสื่อโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งสื่อทางเลือกอย่างพวกเราซึ่งเป็นสื่อเล็กๆและขบวนการเองก็ไม่ค่อยไว้วางใจต่อบทบาทหน้าที่ผมอยากจะถามวิทยากรทั้งหมดที่อยู่บนเวทีเนี่ยในสถานการณ์ท่ามกลางความขัดแย้งอย่างนี้นี่สื่อจะทำหน้าที่อย่างไรขอบคุณครับ
ก็คงทิ้งคำถามไว้นะคะ We will have to go for lunch and then get all the replies there. Thank you for your contribution, and please give a big hand to all of our panelists.